Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our DATCP Meat Industry Office Hours. My name is Molly Mueller, and I'm a Public Information Officer here at DATCP. Today's session will be recorded. It'll be posted online and sent out via Gov Delivery for viewing. The slides you're about to view will also be made available online and via our GovD newsletter. With us today is DATCP Livestock and Meat Specialist Jeff Swenson, who will discuss impacts and results of the Meat Processor Infrastructure Grant Program. And we have Paul Humphrey, Director of DATCP's Bureau of Meat and Poultry Businesses, who will share updates from DATCP's Division of Food and Recreational Safety, including an overview of the Food Safety and Inspection Service, FSIS, on-site visit. At the end of this session, we'll have time for questions. Those are in the Q&A section, which are available to you. Paul, we're going to go ahead and get started with you today. Please welcome us to your Bureau's updates.
Yep. Thank you, Molly, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. As the seasons appear to be changing, that means it's time for another office hours. So good morning. This morning, we will review a couple of things, as Molly indicated, the FSIS on-site audit. I'll have a few industry reminders for everyone, and again, highlighting some training opportunities that are available to the industry. So a little bit about our on-site audit, or the audit process. So as many of you know, the state program operates in a cooperative agreement with FSIS, and as part of that, there is oversight of our program as our program receives federal funding to some degree. So in the end, FSIS is seeking to determine that the state is operating in a manner that's at least equal to, and it's in quotes because it's a operative phrase, it means something, and the link will take you to a location that identifies the requirements that FSIS is verifying to assign that term to our program, at least equal to. Part of that process is an annual self-assessment that the team completes every year. We provide documentation, both in terms of our procedures, but then also evidence of implementation to FSIS for review and acceptance that, again, we're implementing a program that's at least equal to that of FSIS. That's purely done on paper, but every 3 years they come on site to verify that the program is in fact doing what we say we're going to do and is implementing procedures and methods appropriately. In addition to the day-to-day component that our inspection team performs, the audit also reviews the Bureau of Laboratory Sciences services down the hill that performs testing on behalf of our state program of meat establishment samples. In addition to civil rights compliance, because again, we're receiving federal dollars, civil rights is also assessed. And lastly, because there's money being exchanged, financial accountability, there's a financial review component as well. All right, so a brief summary. The audit took place late July, early August. 15 official establishments were visited as part of that review. In addition to one custom exempt establishment was visited. Our compliance staff member, regulatory specialist, demonstrated and performed an in-commerce surveillance review, so not at a meat establishment, so be somewhere that's in commerce, such as a retail establishment or distributor or something of that nature. And in the end, we'll talk about some of the findings, but before I do, one point of clarity that I wanted to offer to industry is how establishments are identified. I mentioned this in the last office hours, but through conversations that took place as part of the audit, establishments felt that they were maybe being targeted or intentionally selected, and there's a iota of truth to that in the fact that there are criteria that are being used by FSIS to select establishments. Things such as volume, meaning production volume, past history of product positives, history of recalls, history of enforcement actions, things of that nature. They also identified plants that they use as a control group. So plants that don't have that history, but are just an average representative of a state plant, and as well as a plant that's just under a brand new license. So assessing our licensing process through that as well. So in the end, FSIS identified 6 findings, as they're known as, where the program staff, meaning DATCP staff, did not identify the noncompliance during the audit, but the auditor did. And so that's ultimately the test of our program's efficacy, is whether or not we can identify noncompliance when it's observed, right? So that number 6 is something I wanted to highlight. That's a very good number. It represents two things, and I want to call that out as a celebration, as kind of a positive. That means by and large, our staff are able to identify noncompliance as they observe it in the field, not just during the audit, but all year round. But also that represents that industry has a low level of noncompliance, right? Meaning the industry has risen to a level to where you can't identify something that's not there. So I want to call it out as kind of a joint celebration of both industry and our program, and we should be very proud that we perform very, very well as an entire state through the audit process. And I'll review some of those findings next. So the first finding is kind of an important one. So in this instance, the product that was reviewed had not been properly addressed within the HACCP plan. And some of you may recognize the significance of that, right? That's kind of a fundamental piece. So as part of that, the product, the hazards that were relevant were not properly identified or addressed, and the flow chart did not match the production process, meaning steps that were involved weren't even identified to then assess for the hazards, right? So that's something to pay close attention to. For both inspection staff and for industry, that the products that are being produced are adequately identified within a HACCP category, and the HACCP category matches that production process for that product. The second emphasized finding is an important one as well. This pertains to monitoring activities, specifically when recording temperatures, that the time and date and initials or signature of the person performing that monitoring activity occur at the time of monitoring each time. So the regulation there that kind of specifies that is 9 CFR 417.5B, that each entry on a record maintained under the HACCP plan shall be made at the time of the event the event occurs, and include the date and time recorded, and shall be signed or initialed by the employee making the entry. So where this comes into play, and where this specifically happened, was where monitoring is a multi-step process, meaning there's different times and intervals and temperatures that are being captured in the monitoring record, but there was only one initial, right? So that needs to happen at each time that the monitoring event is occurring. It's important to note that this finding occurred 6 years ago, and our same auditor was a part of that audit 6 years ago. So she did readily identified this as an area of noncompliance for the program. Also of note, if your establishment is me, myself, and I, meaning you're the only person that works there, you obviously can't monitor yourself. So there are some, well, I should. Sorry, disregard that. That's a slightly related but different topic. But nonetheless, monitoring occurs and it's initial at each time. All right, food contact surfaces. Meat industry wide, Listeria is a kind of a hot button item. It's got a lot of attention, as it should. It's an important pathogen. And so part of a plant's requirements is to identify food contact surfaces that are going to be sampled as part of their Listeria control program. And so the finding was that not all food contact surfaces had been identified that are relevant to the process. Specifically, in a couple instances, was packaging materials. So as a resource, it's linked there. It's the last 2 pages of a recent emphasized notice, to me, is the most up-to-date, all-encompassing list of food contact surfaces. There's other references that exist, but this one has additional sites in it. So attachment 2 at the end of notice 4824 is a very good resource that establishments can use when they consider their own plant equipment processes, to identify which ones are relevant to them and to make sure that those are identified in their Listeria control program. Right. Direct observation. The regulation is provided. I won't read the entirety of it, other than item number 2, direct observations of monitoring activities and corrective actions. So as part of a plant's verification activities, corrective actions are required to be directly observed. And so that is something that was a system finding. It was the case across the board at establishments that were visited where HACCP deviation had occurred, corrective actions occurred, but direct observation had not been documented. So this is where my mind was faster than our slides earlier. So if it's just you in the establishment, you can't directly observe your performance of corrective actions. So that was where my remark was going to relate. But if the establishment has multiple employees, then it would be appropriate for someone to observe corrective actions being implemented and to document that direct observation as you would for other direct observations within the establishment. The instructions for staff use some interesting phrasing. The phrasing is frequently enough to verify that the actions being performed are in a manner that meets the requirements. So I would hope deviations don't occur on a regular basis. So if they are on a very infrequent basis, or just one time in a 12-month period, then that would be, a reasonable person would expect that to be observed, right? If for some reason that direct deviations occur on a very routine basis, maybe that frequency is lower. But by and large, this was not occurring as an activity at all, and so that was why it was a finding. Again, documentation of the direct observation is provided there in the regulation. And as a way of reaching industry, an MOI has been provided to staff to share with industry to further explain this requirement in each establishment. The last two findings are more, I would say, benign in nature, meaning they're kind of everyday common type activities, things around labeling, things around product storage. And so I've provided them there just as, again, a reminder. So product stored in the cooler, not identified. Establishments must have a way to identify the product, the ingredients in the product, its inspection status, meaning is it inspected, is it custom, is it something else, right? Or retail maybe. Its inspection status, if performing custom operations, and the source or lot of the product, meaning is there a way to identify which production date or production lot this rack, this box, etc. represents, so that it can be traced back and identified if inspection were to ask about it or inquire about it. The other finding has to do with products being stored on the floor. That was the finding, pretty straightforward finding. Product was stored on the floor. All right, as far as audit closure, we as a program provided a corrective action plan to FSIS, which was accepted. And so right now we're in the midst of executing that plan. So part of that this week, we held a webinar for staff to go through the same content with a little bit more instruction beyond, but training and overview of the findings. Additionally, the program is going to be doing what's called a survey of establishments not visited. This is a normal part of audit closure, where the program will be going out to establishments that were not part of the audit and looking for these same findings to see if it's a program-wide trend or if a trend exists outside of the audit establishments. To accomplish this, the program is identifying 4 ready-to-eat establishments or those that produce ready-to-eat product for performing this review of these targeted findings. And we're going to look for trends. So plants that are eligible for this would be those that produce RTE product, were not visited as part of the audit, and are also not a CIS establishment. So that'll be occurring here in the next 2 weeks. We'll pull the data together and then provide that back to FSIS. And the goal in the end, of course, is to get the letter that says that we've achieved an at least equal to determination. All right. So with the audit part concluded, I wanted to provide a couple of reminders to industry. And for anyone that's attended officers before, you've seen this in office hours previously, but it's important that we review them yet again. So what does the Bureau expect from meat establishments? respectful and cordial behavior, a good faith effort towards complying with the requirements, the availability and willingness to discuss production processes and controls. So being able to have discussions about what's going on, taking corrective action when a hazard's identified, right? So being responsive to food safety hazards and risks, acknowledging the findings. So what does that mean? It means addressing it as promptly as possible, appealing it if maybe for some reason there's a disagreement there. But one option is definitely not to ignore it, right? Lastly, their immediate response to all findings regarding inhumane handling or product contamination. So what can meat establishments expect from the Bureau? Respectful and cordial behavior, same, right? So you see some similarities here. Trustful communication and honesty about our intentions when in the establishment and why we're asking questions and what tasks we're performing. You should be able to obtain that from inspection staff as to what they're doing. A willingness to explain the why, right? So whether it's a requirement or a process or something that's occurring, staff should be able to provide a why as to the background of the activity or maybe its importance. Accurate information provided on the regulatory requirements. So being able to support what's being identified with a regulatory basis. A willingness to explain the findings, including the reason for the food safety concern or regulatory concern. Sorry about that, my office turned off here. Immediate intervention if inhumane practices are observed, meaning if something occurs, you should expect that staff are going to stop the activity, take a regulatory control action, and have further conversation from that point forward. Same way, if direct product contamination is observed, you should expect staff to address that, control that, and then have conversations around that. One thing that's not on the original slide, but I added, is that you should expect non-compliances to be identified. For establishments that have been under state inspection for a long time, there may have been a time when staff were not readily identifying non-compliance or documenting it. If they were to identify it, maybe they just didn't document it, right? And establishments today may likely have noticed a change in how inspection is performed. And that is for maybe two reasons. One is it's the expectation, right? You just heard about the audit and the requirements and the oversight. That is the inspector's role to identify and document non-compliance. The other factor that's in there too is training. Our program has made some concerted efforts to elevate our staff's training as time has gone on. And so the fruits of that, if you want to call it that, is that staff are more readily able to identify non-compliance and are documenting it. But I wanted to share two additional thoughts and a request. So the first is that receiving a non-compliance is routine. It's everyday, it's normal. It's a way for the Bureau to communicate the finding, the concern, the hazard to the establishment while providing due process, meaning it's in writing, you can see it, you can touch it, you can research it, you can appeal it, it's a record, it's there. So that's why it's important that those things be documented. Secondly, as I mentioned just a second ago, is that the staff that are issuing NRs are doing as they've been asked, right? So they're doing their jobs as they've been asked, as they've been trained. So I want to be clear that when non-compliances are issued, they're not picking on an establishment. They're not targeting an establishment. They're not being overly critical. They're doing what's being asked of them. And lastly, my request. My last request is to consider your inspector a resource, not an adversary, right? So what does that mean? Communicate in a respectful manner, right? So as time has gone on, change is happening. We're trying to help staff better understand the regulations as well as industry. And so non-compliances are being documented. It doesn't mean that we think that plants are not doing a good job, nothing of the sort. It just means that it exists and we'd like to see it addressed. And we document that so that everyone has a record of those conversations. We provide outreach as to the requirements. We just ask that the conversations that happen after that remain cordial. and professional. Just given the nature of our role as state employees and as kind of providing a service to industry from a inspection perspective, I just ask that staff be treated with a margin of respect, and as we have those conversations, because sometimes they can be a little bit animated and a little bit excited. And like I mentioned earlier, there's maybe a reason for that or a rationale for that, given maybe this is different than the past. As I've explained, what we have now today is here for a reason. It's not meant to cause anyone any kind of stress or anxiety. It's just meant to document what's there, and so we can move forward in a productive and positive fashion to address the noncompliance whenever it exists. And the reason why I mentioned some of this is that the Bureau has continued to see a trend, and it's a concerning one, of establishments that have definitely crossed the line into a more obstructive and intimidating type of a conversation. And so the Bureau has addressed those situations as they arise, but the goal is to not have those in the first place, right? So that's why I've made them the request that we remain professional. If the need be for an appeal, please reach out to the supervisor. There's an appeal process that follows. All members of the management team will be willing to listen to the plant, hear their perspective. Hopefully there's a regulatory basis for the argument, not just that I don't like the finding just because I don't want to have to fix something. That's not a rational basis for an appeal. But let's try to find a way to work through things, because most times there's a rather simple solution that can be obtained to move forward in a positive fashion. All right. Another reminder is around the topic of schedule agreements. So all establishments, whether federal or state, have an approved schedule agreement that must be adhered to. If there are changes, meaning for some reason you don't need inspection on a given day, or maybe you want to add a day, or you want to have a weekend inspection day, those things are usually not a problem, but we do expect those to be communicated in advance, typically in writing to the supervisor. Again, for the same reasons, it's there for everyone to see, and if it's approved, it's there, everyone can see it, versus verbal conversations. So please communicate with your supervisor in the area to communicate those things. For us, it's important because it allows us to be effective and efficient, right? So there's dozens of occasions where we show up to an establishment and they're done for the day, and their production day is only half over. Or we show up and they say, well, we're not doing anything today, or we're just doing custom product, or we're just doing wild game processing. Those things are all fine. We just ask that you let us know so we don't spend time driving out to visit the establishment if there's nothing there for us to inspect for the day. Again, just if you could backtrack 1 second there, Molly, I wanted to emphasize something else. My initial comments were just kind of that normal request, please communicate. But again, we have establishments that are not doing this. And so what that means is we have product that's made without the benefit of inspection. Again, a statement that carries a lot of weight. We have plants that have indicated that they actually have done this. They've canceled for the day, but yet produced anyway. And so staff, when they return, identified that, and we have to control the product and have conversations from that point forward. We've had establishments operate on weekends without requesting inspection, et cetera. And so again, the goal is not to pursue enforcement action just because it's something that we need to look for something to do. These can all be avoided through proper communication. So please communicate your inspection needs. The program is very accommodating, and we can avoid those unfortunate circumstances. Some training opportunities. Many of the same opportunities exist as they have in the past. So up at River Falls Humane Handling Institute, there's trainings that are coming up this September and October. Wanting to highlight two aspects of this. The last is the third kind of opportunity there is the bundle. It's both trainings on back-to-back days. And as indicated, that specific bundled training opportunity is eligible for reimbursement of the cost there. So there's a scholarship opportunity for meat establishments to send staff. Another aspect to note has to do with the fact that they are able to have an on-time in-person translator so that the course can be offered in both English and Spanish to anyone that wishes to attend. So that's a very nice feature as well. Wanted to highlight again my recommendation that plants go to this course. As a state program, we do see humane handling issues arise, and it's usually around two elements: training and also equipment maintenance. Right. So as part of River Falls efforts, they'll show establishments how to evaluate and maintain their equipment. You can even send them your equipment and they will service it for you. So there's lots of positives that can be had through attendance of this training. So I would definitely encourage any establishment that's involved in slaughter to send as many staff as you possibly can because it's a great learning opportunity. At UW, there's a number of courses yet being offered this year. They're listed there for your review. The link will take you to the website to register and further look at the explanations and the course offerings there. Again, the one that I wanted to highlight specifically was the basic HACCP course. That's it fulfills the requirement under 417 for someone on to be HACCP trained in order to develop, modify, reassess HACCP plans. So it's an important offering. One caveat that's a little bit different this time around is that the tuition reimbursement is no longer eligible for the basic course. That funding period has dwindled, and so this one would be at cost, which I believe now is $600. Another great opportunity that is worth mentioning is the Master Meat Crafter Training Program. Application period is now open. So again, if you go to that link, you can see the further story about how the program is laid out, the different components of it, the classroom components, the more practical components of developing a project. So a great opportunity for those that really have a really strong expertise and interest in the craft of making meat products. Well, that concludes my my updates for this morning. I'll of course be on for questions at the end. So at this point, I will turn things over to Jeff Swenson.
Thank you, Paul. All right, I'll go ahead and get, excuse me, Jeff's slides pulled up. Jeff, go ahead and take it away.
Oh, sounds good. Thank you, Paul. And I just wanted to mention on the Humane Handling Institute too, there's budgets and that tuition reimbursement for humane handling won't last forever either. So if you are even thinking about that, it would be a good time to send employees to that training. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Meat Processor Infrastructure Grant. The Meat Processor Infrastructure Grant program is state funded. We talked about the Poultry and Resiliency Grant at a previous office hours, and that was federally funded. This is a state program, and it was meant to grow Wisconsin's meat industry and improve the long-term viability of the state's livestock industry. And I will say, as we get started here, that this was informed by meat processors. We had stakeholder meetings that started spring of 2020, shortly after the effects of COVID-19 was impacting meat processing. And we gathered meat processors to find out what a grant program should look like. And that was also the group that really informed the formation of Humane Handling Institute and other meat talent programs as well. So this initially was proposed in Tony Evers' budget in 2021. It was approved by the legislature, so he put it in the budget. It was approved. It is limited to $200,000 each year, and it's renewed every biennium. The maximum grant per establishment is $50,000, and I'll back up just a little bit to that $200,000 figure. That does fluctuate, so it can get a little confusing to follow. Sometimes more money is available based on the legislature and the governor putting additional funds into the budget. So when we get into some of those slides, each year of the program, that number does fluctuate a little bit, and I'll call that out. So the first round happened in 2022. And now with $200,000 available, $50,000 maximum per grant. That's not a lot of grants. And what we saw was 100 applications come in from meat establishments around the state. And of those 100 applications, $4.4 million was requested. And again, we only had $200,000 to give out as grants. So 5 grants were awarded. And if you work the math out on that, 3 were fully funded at $50,000, 2 were partially funded, which is an option that the grant reviewers have to try to spread that money around just a little bit more. And of those 5 grantees, 2 were expansion projects. 1 was a new build, and 2 were infrastructure improvements or equipment. And when I say that, it could be revamping or making adding new cooler space. It could be expanding livestock holding areas and improving those, and it could be a simple equipment purchase. All 5 of those did harvest, and all projects in that first round have been completed and closed. So we saw some definite trends on the things that meat processors need to increase capacity. One of the main goals of the grant program was to increase harvest capacity in the state. All 5 of these do harvest. The stakeholder group that I mentioned before did insist that this should be a dollar for dollar match. So if a $50,000 grant is received, that meat processor would be responsible for matching that with at least $50,000. And another goal of the program, again informed by meat processors themselves, was increasing harvest capacity by at least 20%. So then the second round came in 2023, and again, $200,000 was available. 30 fewer applications received, but still oversubscribed. 70 applications requesting $2.8 million. 8 grants were awarded. No grant recipient in this round got the full $50,000. The decision was made to give grants of less money, but more processors. And when that happens, our grant staff does reach out to the meat processor to find out if they still want to move forward with receiving the grant, or if that partial funding wouldn't be enough to spur them to invest in their plant. And of that, there was one expansion, 6 improvements or equipment, and 1 new build as well. So 6 of 8 of those establishments do harvest. And again, it's not a requirement that the establishment harvest, but if they don't, if they're further processors, they still are held to the 20% output criteria. And again, of those 8 grants, they have all been completed and closed. Now we get into some more current data, or what's going on right now with the grant program. These grants basically are 2 years, so a project, an establishment has 2 years to complete that project, and 2 years to be reimbursed for, request reimbursement for it. So 70 applications again. $3 million was requested. Now, in this particular calendar year or fiscal year, the legislature did approve additional dollars. So there was $1.8 million of grant funds available. Again, still the upper limit of $50,000 per grant. So 38 grants were awarded. There was 1 expansion, no new builds, and 37 infrastructure improvements or equipment purchases, and 20 of the 38 do harvest. And 16 of these projects have been completed. 22 are in progress. They would have until next year to complete that grant project. And so round 4 was recently announced. The grant request for proposal was posted in January. So these grants are underway. The contracts have been out. They've been signed by the establishment, and they are basically just beginning. So $250,000 available. Again, not the $200,000 base. There was one grant recipient from the previous round that chose not to move forward with this project. So that money was made available earlier this year for this round of grants. $2.2 million requested. 9 grants were awarded. All were basically equipment purchases or improvements to their operation, and all nine of those harvest. And like I said, they're just beginning their grant projects. So as we move through this, now we've got 30 grants that have closed, 31 that are open. The employment numbers continue to grow rapidly as we close these grants. So the numbers are all self-reported. So the grant recipient or that establishment owner is communicating to us on how many jobs they've added. So of the 30 grants that have been closed, 65 full-time employees have been added, 13 part-time jobs have been added. And some of you have heard me say this before, and I apologize for that, but I think it's important to note that some of these grant projects do incorporate automation or equipment that would speed up the processing process and save time and save labor. So when in the case of, say, a roll stock machine, oftentimes a meat processor will say, well, I had 2 or 3 people that packaged full time. Now that I have this roll stock machine, I can cut it back to 1. And what we're finding is they don't lay off those other 2 employees. They find other work for them to do. So not only are they retaining employees, but they're adding employees as well. So cumulatively, again, this is self-reported. The grant recipients that have completed their projects say that they have seen $7 million cumulatively in an increase in gross sales. So for every state dollar that went into these programs, about $7 has been returned to the processor in the form of improved gross profits. And each grant dollar has spurred over $200 in industry investment. And that number, I will say, is coming down a little bit as we close more grants. Some of the grants that we're working on now are smaller projects, $50,000 grant. They might be buying a piece of equipment for $150,000 and $2,000. So it's not a huge expansion or a new build. So the economic impact may come down a little bit as we go on, but the number of employees will continue to grow. Now, looking ahead a little bit, we'll go back to our $200,000 base. This biennium budget, there's approval for $700,000 per year for 2 years in the budget. So there will be $700,000 for grants. The request for proposals will be open in mid-January. We're aiming for January 12th. So on or about January 12th, the request for proposals will go live on the DATCP website. The link to the application will be on there as well. Maximum grant amount will be $50,000 again. And in 2027, no timeline on that yet. Guessing during the winter, the RFP will go up. But again, $700,000 will be available. And that's all I have, unless there's any questions, Molly.
All right, everybody. There is a Q&A section that you should have access to if there are any questions. I don't see any at the moment. Just give everyone a moment to type in if they'd like to. And while anyone is asking questions, I do also have this slide pulled up with our QR code. We welcome everybody to participate in that by scanning it with your smartphone. We're always looking for future topics related to meat industry office hours, guest speakers that you may want to see appear, and any of those ideas along with that survey. All right, looks like we've got some questions here. Emily's question is for Paul. With FSIS finding number 2, If an establishment transfers electronic temperature monitoring records to paper records, would they still have to would they still have to initial associated with each temperature? I'm sorry if I'm not reading that correctly. Or would all the temperatures transferred to a paper at the same time be considered one entry and it would be acceptable to only have one set of initials?
Yep, the latter. Yep. So as the questioner indicated, if someone is monitoring electronic records at one moment in time, they're doing this review and they're capturing those multiple temperatures, then that occurred at one moment in time. So then one time would be appropriate for that monitoring activity.
Thank you, Paul. Give another minute here or so for anyone to throw any of their questions in the chat. And just a reminder to everybody that this session has been recorded. We will post this on the meat industry website. I've got that linked in the chat as well, in the Q&A as well. And I'm not seeing anything else come through here. So I'll go ahead and say that that wraps up today's session. We'd like to again thank DATCP's Jeff Swenson and Paul Humphrey for these great presentations today. Like I said, this has been recorded. We'll post this online with a link to the video and today's slides, which will have all of those links that Jeff and Paul provided to you. And we'll also send out a Gov delivery with that information before the weekend. Thank you all again for joining us. We'll hope to see you at the next office hours and have a great day. Thanks.